Hello, and welcome back to Haunted Drift Horror. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into haunted realms filled with pure horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story one it all started with what our town used to call us. The miracle generation. That is what they named us. Every single one of us who managed to survive being born in a place where children simply were not allowed to exist. I do not mean that in some metaphorical way. I do not mean the schools were bad or the neighborhoods were rough. I mean children could not survive here. Babies would come into the world, and then, within 3 or 4 days, they would be gone. Just like that. No explanation. No answers. It had been that way for as long as anyone could remember. So when an entire class of babies suddenly appeared and kept breathing, kept growing, kept living past those first few deadly days, people did not know what to make of it. They called us miracles. They whispered about us in grocery stores and stared at us in church. We were the impossible children, the ones who had somehow beaten the odds. 18 years later, Seth Daniels killed his parents. And I do not mean kill in the way you might imagine. I do not mean he set the house on fire while they were sleeping or slipped something into their food. I mean he killed them in the most brutal and savage way imaginable. According to the town newspaper, the one my mom is always reading like her life depends on it, the bodies were mutilated, torn apart, like some kind of animal had gotten to them. I knew Seth. I had known him since we were little kids. He lived right across the road from me. When we were young, he used to invite me over to watch Power Rangers, and he would sing along to the theme song and dance around the living room without a care in the world. Seth loved his mom and dad. He really did. He was not the kind of person who could do something like that. The town media went almost completely silent after it happened. There was one small article in the paper, and that was it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. I figured everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one had the courage to say it out loud. It had to be the curse. But even that explanation did not sit right. This curse, whatever it was, had let us live for 17 years. Why would it suddenly decide to act now? And why would it go after parents instead of children? Why would it force a kid to murder the people who raised him? One detail stuck out to me more than anything else. It was Seth's 18th birthday, the exact day. I knew this because he had been talking about throwing a party at school. And I am not a genius. But what kid actively plans a birthday party on the same day they are supposedly planning to butcher their own parents? It did not add up. I started asking questions because nobody else seemed to care. And I flat out refused to believe Seth had done this willingly. Mom told me the case was too gruesome for me to know about, so I decided to find out on my own. We are a small town. Everyone knows everyone. Finn Novak was the son of the sheriff, and it cost me $20 and a promise to introduce him to my older brother to get access to his dad's office. The whole thing felt very dramatic and secretive. I felt like one of those detectives you see on television, sneaking around corners and looking over my shoulder. The case documents were still fresh, sitting right there in the top drawer beneath the sheriff's desk. I picked up the folder and motioned for Finn to keep watch. He shot me an annoyed look, but went over to the receptionist and tried to charm her into a conversation while I flipped through the autopsy notes. After reading through them, I wished I could scrub the information from my brain entirely. Finn started waving at me from across the room, making frantic hand gestures like a cartoon character trying to warn someone about danger. His dad was coming. I forced myself to stay calm, even though my stomach was twisting into knots. I quickly snapped a few photos of the notes on my phone slipped the folder back into the drawer, and got out of there just in time. Finn did not seem particularly interested in what I had found, but he still sat with me on a bench in the middle of the town square afterward. He had a Starbucks latte balanced on his knee, and he was slurping loudly through the straw. He leaned over and peeked at my phone screen. "So what is the verdict? Did he kill them?" I had a hard time answering without feeling my breakfast trying to come back up. I swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, Mom was right. The autopsy notes were horrific. There was barely anything left to perform an autopsy on. In my head, I had imagined that maybe Seth had stabbed his parents. That would have been terrible enough. But the reality was so much worse. He had ripped them apart. The notes described what remained of the bodies in clinical, detached detail. A single torso. A head. That was it. Both victims were listed as Sonia Daniels, age 38, and Oliver Daniels, age 39. The photos stapled to the end of the report were black and white and grainy, but even so, I could not get them out of my mind. A head. A torso. That was all that was left of Seth's parents, which meant that somehow this teenager had possessed the strength to literally tear two adult human beings to shreds. I passed my phone to Finn, who hissed through his teeth and muttered a string of curse words under his breath. He handed back his empty cup while squinting at the screen. Crazy bastard actually butchered them. He did not butcher them, I managed to say, even though I knew I was drowning in denial. I could not defend Seth when the evidence was right there in front of me in black and white. He had not just killed them. He had dismembered them in a way that no human being, not even the most deranged killer you could imagine, should have been capable of. This was something animalistic, something beyond explanation. The more I thought about it, the sicker I felt. My mouth filled with bile, and suddenly I was on my hands and knees on the pavement, choking and heaving up everything in my stomach while Finn sat there watching. It was in that moment, while I was spitting acid onto the concrete, that the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. If Seth Daniels had killed his mom and dad out of nowhere on his 18th birthday, was that same fate eventually going to come for me too? It had to be the curse. There was no other explanation. I did not dig any further into the investigation after that, because I was terrified of finding something even worse. Murder that comes from emotion or motive is horrible, absolutely. But at least it can be understood on some level. There is a reason behind it, even if that reason is twisted and ugly. But when you are talking about some invisible force taking control of a person's will and making them kill the people they love most in the world, there are no answers, only questions. Our town had been plagued by something unseen for generations, something that stole our children away. Was it possible that we had angered it somehow? That by simply existing, by being born and surviving, we had provoked whatever this thing was? Several days passed before Mom told me that Seth had been taken to juvenile detention. He never even got a proper court case. He confessed immediately. His exact words, according to everyone who was there, were simple and chilling. Yes, I killed my mom and dad. He said it in a flat, emotionless voice while being dragged out of his house with his arms tied behind his back, a pair of expensive-looking Ray-Bans covering his eyes. The words were cold and mechanical, as if he felt nothing at all. I watched the whole thing from my bedroom window. Local news crews swarmed him, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in his face. He almost looked like some kind of celebrity being escorted through a crowd. But that was not Seth. The Seth I knew hated attention. If a teacher called on him to read aloud in class, his face would turn bright red, and he would stumble over every word, looking like he might cry. The person I was watching now was someone else entirely. This version of Seth held his head high. His movements were smooth and robotic as he calmly climbed into the back of a waiting SUV without looking back. Despite seeing all of that, despite watching him stand there without a shred of emotion in front of the cameras, I still believed in my gut that Seth would never have done something like this on his own. I know that murderers can turn out to be the most unexpected people. Friends, family, the ones you grow up with and trust completely. But there was something about this case that I could not let go of. Something that kept gnawing at me no matter how hard I tried to push it away. Mom told me to drop it when I started asking questions about the curse and about how exactly I had been born. One night at dinner, I pushed it too far. She dropped her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter that made my twin jump in his seat across the table. Freddie and I were fraternal twins. We looked nothing alike. I have natural brown hair, Freddie is a redhead, and our younger sister, Noah, is blonde. Normal people would probably find that strange, but in our town, it was actually pretty common for kids not to look like their parents. People went to extreme lengths to have children here, and nobody questioned the results. It does not make sense, I said for maybe the third or fourth time, fully aware that I was fixating on it and unable to stop myself. Why now? I shoved pasta into my mouth and ignored the glare Freddie was shooting me from across the table. If we really are cursed, why wait 17 whole years before doing something? Mom cleared her throat and paused with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Whenever Dad worked late, the wine came out. We were not supposed to tell him about it. What did I tell you about discussing business that is not ours? She said. But it is my business, I said. Seth was my friend. Freddie chimed in without looking up from his switch. He was my friend. You did not even like him. Remember when you called him a jerk? I kicked him under the table. Hard, from the way he flinched and his eyes went wide for a split second. I knew it hurt. We were 12, I said, and he stole my doll. You still called him names, Freddie said in a sing-song voice, his eyes drifting back to his game. I actually played with him. He only paid attention to you because he wanted to play on your D's. You called him a big-nosed freak, I shot back. So did you. Noah, our younger sister, who was generally better behaved than either of us, ducked her head to hide a laugh. Mom, who was now about halfway through a bottle of wine, slammed her glass down on the table hard enough to make us all go quiet. Her eyes locked onto mine. If you ask one more question about the Daniels case, I am taking your phone for a week. Freddie snickered, but she turned on him just as fast. That goes for you, too. She stood up from the table. I am going upstairs. Whoever is on the chore rotation tonight, please clean the dishes and make the kitchen presentable before your father gets home. Freddie huffed and folded his arms like a little kid. What about Noah? She was laughing. I was not. Noah squeaked, and from the noise Freddie made immediately after, I could tell our little sister had kicked him too. Mom did not respond. She took her glass of wine and the rest of the bottle and disappeared upstairs, just like she always did. We were used to it by now. Every night when Dad was working late, Mom would abandon us at the dinner table and go through the same ritual she had been performing since we were little kids. Armed with nothing but wine and a candle, she would lock herself in her bedroom and stay there until the early hours of the morning. When Freddie and I were about 10 years old, we tried sneaking into her room one night to see what she was doing. But by the time we got there, she had fallen asleep on the floor with the candle still burning beside her. That night played out exactly the same way. Mom vanished upstairs, and I took it upon myself to clean up the kitchen. Freddie went out to hang with friends, and Noah became a zombie the second she opened TikTok on her phone. Mom had a strict rule that we all had to surrender our phones and electronics at 11 every night. No exceptions. That included gaming devices, And she even went as far as switching off the electrical outlets in our bedrooms so there would be no sneaky late-night gaming sessions. I thought we would grow out of that rule eventually, but it never changed. Freddie, who was always the golden child, had dutifully left his phone and his switch on the kitchen table before heading out, even though Mom also said he was not supposed to leave the house on school nights. But apparently that rule did not apply to him. I was sitting on the kitchen counter, frowning at my phone screen, reading and rereading the Daniels autopsy notes for what had to be the 100th time, when Noah let out a shriek from the other room. I glanced at the time. It was 1 minute past 11, which meant Noah was already breaking the no-phone rule. I hopped off the counter and paused to drop my phone next to Freddie's on the table. But then a thought hit me, and I stopped. Why was my very first instinct to put the phone down? I tried to pocket it instead, and a sharp, pulsing pain suddenly shot through my fingers. It felt like an electric shock, quick and intense, lasting maybe a second or two at most. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. At the same moment, the lights above me flickered violently, and then went out completely, leaving me standing in total darkness. The warm glow from the hallway told me the power outage was just the kitchen. Mom had always been strange about technology. She only got us phones because we begged and begged, and Freddie had bought his own switch with money from his part-time job. I looked down at my phone lying face down on the pastel pink tiles. I reached to pick it up, but the same sharp pain writhed up my index finger again, and I pulled my hand back. Noah called my name from the living room. I found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, phone clutched in both hands, her eyes wide and her lips stretched into a huge grin. "Look," she whispered, holding the screen up for me to see. I looked. She was watching some YouTube video, a video essay about serial killers. I did not see anything unusual. "What?" I said. "It is charging." At first, I had no idea what she was talking about. Then my eyes found the little charging symbol at the top of her screen, the lightning bolt icon that shows up when you plug in the charger. But when I followed her finger, pointing across the room, I saw her actual charger cable sitting on the other side of the living room, still plugged into the wall outlet. Nowhere near the phone. Noah was practically vibrating with excitement. "Wait, that is not even the best part," she squeaked. "Watch what happens when I let go." She dropped the phone onto the carpet, and the charging symbol vanished. She picked it back up, and it reappeared. She did it again, and again. Every single time, the same result. When she held the phone, it charged. When she set it down, it stopped. The phone was charging itself without being connected to anything at all. Noah, being Noah, immediately decided she had some kind of superpower. She jumped to her feet and started touching everything electronic in the room. The television, the lamp on the side table, the PlayStation. Nothing happened with any of them. I have to admit, for about a full minute, I was kind of excited too. Then, reality kicked in, and I figured there had to be a scientific explanation. I looked it up and found an article that said electronic devices can technically charge their batteries through various methods without being plugged in. But the same article also said the amount of power generated that way is usually negligible, barely enough to make any real difference. So why had Noah's phone actually been gaining charge? I watched the battery percentage climb from 10 to 16% while she held it. I told myself it was just a malfunction, some weird glitch. It made sense if I thought about it hard enough. The next day, however, did not make sense at all. I was still half asleep when I woke up to find Freddie looming over my bed, shoving his phone in my face. "Just read it," he said. I rubbed my eyes and took the phone, scrolling through a conversation between Freddie and one of his friends. There was a flood of gray messages from the other person, and only 2 blue messages from my brother. The texts described a scene so gruesome it made the Daniels case sound almost tame. Someone else had been killed, torn apart, mutilated beyond recognition. The person texting Freddie had apparently been close enough to see the aftermath before the area was secured, and they described it in horrifying detail. Blood everywhere, painting the walls of the living room like something out of a horror movie. A stretcher brought out with blue sheets draped over it, but there was barely anything underneath. Maybe a hand or a foot, but nothing attached to a body. Just skin and pieces. Freddie had asked who the victim was, and the reply had hit me like a punch to the stomach. Sheriff's son. That was followed by more messages about how the kid who did it was pure evil, how he deserved to rot, how the person writing could not wrap their head around it because the killer had supposedly been close to his father. I was out of bed before my brain could catch up with my body. Finn, I made it 3 steps before I was on my knees, gagging, choking on nothing but dust and air. Freddie sat down on the edge of my bed behind me. "Did you know that kid?" he asked quietly. That was Finn, right? His words barely registered. This time I actually threw up, something sour and awful splattering onto the floor, my stomach clenching over and over. Freddie asked if I was okay. I told him no. He asked if I wanted help. I practically screamed at him to leave me alone. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, but it kept coming, wave after wave of nausea. "Did you check?" I managed to choke out between heaves. "Did you check to see if it was actually Finn?" "Yeah," Freddie said with a sigh. "It was him. Cops already caught him. Apparently he tried to run." He paused. Maybe he was scared. It did not make sense. How could Finn kill his father? He loved his dad. I barely knew the kid outside of him, helping me sneak into the sheriff's office. But even during that brief time, I had seen the photo frames on Sheriff Novak's desk. Pictures of the 2 of them at Christmas, on Father's Day, on vacations, just hanging out together. Back in kindergarten, some kid had loudly called Sheriff Novak a pig, and tiny little Finn had tackled the boy to the ground and nearly knocked him unconscious. Finn was small, lean. There was absolutely no way he was physically strong enough to rip another human being apart. Freddie groaned and flopped backwards on my bed, hanging his head upside down off the edge to look at me. He blew a strand of dark red hair out of his eyes. "Are we cursed?" That was the first time I found myself nodding without hesitation, my thoughts spinning. But I could not just sit there and accept it. I had to talk to Finn. According to Mom, he was being transferred to juvenile detention at noon. Until then, he was being held in a cell downtown. With the sheriff dead, the town's law enforcement was in chaos, scrambling to figure out who was in charge. The station had been packed with people all morning, but they slowly started to thin out as the hours passed. I saw my opening and took it. A group of frantic parents had stormed into the station, screaming about the safety of their children, demanding answers, wanting to know what was being done to protect them. While the woman behind the front counter tried to calm them down, I slipped through the door at the back and made my way to the holding cells. I expected guards. There were none. The commotion out front had apparently pulled everyone away. The first thing I noticed was the flickering light. Not from the overhead bulbs. There was an empty desk sitting in front of the cells with an open laptop on it, and the screen was going haywire, flickering and glitching like it was possessed. Then the light bulb directly above me popped and shattered, sending a rain of tiny glass pieces down around me. I flinched and ducked. "Mara." Finn's voice came from inside the cell. It sounded exactly like Seth's had sounded on the news. Flat, empty, completely void of any emotion. I spun around and found him standing behind the bars, his fingers wrapped around the metal. He looked like something straight out of a horror movie, just standing there in the dim light, perfectly still. I had not known what to expect, but it was not this. I thought Finn would be hysterical, crying, shaking, swearing up and down that he was innocent, that he would never hurt his father, that something had taken control of him. Instead, I was looking at the face of someone who had done something terrible and felt nothing about it. His lips curved into a faint, empty smile. Just like Seth, his eyes were hidden behind a pair of Ray-Bans, expensive-looking ones that seemed out of place against his plain, short-sleeved shirt and jeans, both of which were covered in dried blood, his father's blood. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but before I could get a word out, his arms dropped to his sides. "Are you not going to wish me a happy birthday?" A cold sensation crawled down my spine like the legs of a spider. I took an involuntary step toward him, my breath catching. "It is your birthday?" He nodded once. "I turned 18 yesterday. Wish me a happy birthday." "Happy birthday," I whispered. And then, because I had to know, I pushed forward. Did you actually? I killed my dad. Finn finished for me in that exact same lifeless tone. No remorse, no hesitation, not a flicker of anything to suggest he felt bad about what he had done. I pulled out his lungs and cut off his head. I skinned him down to the bone and dumped his guts in the toilet to try and hide them. But I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. "You did not mean to. You could not have meant to." Finn cut me off, slicing right through my spiraling thoughts as if they meant nothing. "When is your birthday again?" he asked. There was no curiosity in his voice, no warmth, nothing. The question was simple enough, but it sent me stumbling backward until my shoulders hit the cold concrete wall behind me. "When is your birthday?" he repeated. "Why?" His expression never changed, not even a twitch. "When is your birthday?" "June 23rd, I said, barely above a whisper. Finn stood completely still for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and slipped off his Ray-Bans. At first, I thought he was going for some kind of dramatic reveal, like a character in a movie who is about to confess every detail of their crimes. Instead, the glasses simply slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor of the cell, and I saw what was underneath them. Where his eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just two dark, hollow cavities staring back at me. Somehow, still alive. Somehow, still aware. I could not stop myself from stepping closer, leaning in, squinting through the dim light to make sure I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. I was not imagining it. Finn's eyes were gone, completely gone, ripped clean from his skull. The skin around the empty sockets was torn and bruised, the damage jagged and violent, as if he had done it to himself in a frenzy. "Happy birthday," he said in the same dull, lifeless drawl. I recoiled. Finn bent down slowly, feeling around on the floor for the glasses with his fingers until he found them, and then he slid them back onto his face, for the 23rd, I mean. Then he pressed his face against the bars, pushing as close to me as the metal would allow. Out of nowhere, a manic giggle erupted from him. His expression stayed completely blank, completely vacant, but his mouth stretched into this wide, awful grin. The grin of someone who had butchered his own father and felt absolutely nothing. "I am looking forward to you joining me." That was when I turned and ran. But before I could slam the door shut behind me, his voice followed me down the hallway, bouncing off the walls. "And your brother." His laughter turned wild and hysterical, almost inhuman. I could hear the metallic clang of his skull smacking against the bars over and over as he screamed after me. "Do not forget your brother." I was caught almost immediately. Someone grabbed me and dragged me out of the back area of the station, and within minutes Mom was there, and she lectured me for 2 straight hours. But even sitting in the living room while she stood over me yelling, with half the officers from the precinct crowded around us, I could not stop hearing Finn's words. His voice was lodged in my skull like a splinter. It was only when Mom pointed directly at my face, her lips moving but the sound not reaching me, that I snapped back to reality and got hit with yet another lecture about privacy and breaking the law and how I could have been arrested for what I had done. I ignored most of it. Sitting cross-legged on the couch next to Noah, who was pretending to scroll through her phone, I finally spoke up. "I think it is the curse." The entire room went silent. Mom looked genuinely startled for a second before shaking her head. "That is not what we are discussing right now, young lady. Do you understand how serious this is?" Freddie, who was sitting in the recliner across the room, decided to pile on. Like Noah, he was doing a terrible job of hiding the fact that he was thoroughly enjoying watching me get torn apart. "Yeah, Mara, I cannot believe you would be so careless and stupid." He paused, and a grin spread across his face. "Oh, wait. Did you not also break in last month to steal documents from the Daniels case?" "Pretty sure that was illegal, too, but what do I know? I am just a high school student. I do not sneak into the sheriff's office when I am supposed to be in class." I glared at him. "How do you even know about that? Do you go through my phone?" He shrugged and adjusted himself comfortably in the recliner. "Your passcode is 4 zeros. A toddler could figure it out." I do not know if it was the stress of everything that had happened with Finn, or my brother's stupid grin, or the fact that I was scared out of my mind and had no one to talk to about it, but suddenly I was launching myself across the room at him. I did not even know what I planned to do. He is taller than me, stronger, more built. He could have easily held me off. And that is basically what happened. What I thought was going to be a real fight turned into me flailing and trying to land punches while Freddie just shoved me away with a scoff, barely even trying. I did manage to clip him in the nose, which felt satisfying for about half a second before Mom stormed in and pulled us apart, going into full-blown mom mode. Mom mode was when she got truly angry. The kind of angry that made the air in the house feel heavy. Noah decided she no longer wanted to be a spectator, and quietly slipped into the kitchen. I was sent to my room, and Freddie was lectured for provoking me. A few hours later, he appeared in my doorway holding a half-eaten donut, a mug of hot cocoa, and wearing an expression that was his version of an apology. It was his way of telling me he was worried I was going to get myself hurt without actually saying those words out loud. I took the donut and the cocoa and told him to go away. He stood there for a while longer, looking like a sad puppy, trying to guilt me into forgiving him, but I closed the door in his face when he started laying it on too thick. I wanted to talk to him about Finn, about what I had seen, about the countdown I could feel approaching. But I knew he would just tell Mom and I would end up in even more trouble. So I sat alone with information that was slowly driving me insane. My 18th birthday was getting closer, and more kids from our generation were turning on their parents. After Finn, it was a girl named Addie, then a boy named Jason, then Sarah, then Kiara. All of them had turned 18 within weeks of each other, and all of them had done the same thing. Killed their parents in brutal, animalistic ways that no normal person should have been capable of. Every single one of them confessed immediately, spoke in that same flat, emotionless voice, and wore sunglasses to hide their eyes. I expected the town to explode. I expected the remaining families to start panicking, to point fingers at those of us who had not turned yet, to call us monsters, to say we should never have been born in the first place. But to my absolute shock, there was barely any news coverage. It was as if someone or something was keeping the story contained, muffled, buried. It almost became routine. You would hear about another kid being hauled off to juvenile detention, and people would just shake their heads and move on with their day. June arrived. The days started slipping by, faster and faster, each one shorter than the last, until suddenly it was the night before my 18th birthday, and I was standing alone in my bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror with trembling hands wrapped around a razor blade. Every time I thought about actually doing it, about cutting deep enough into my wrists that the blood would not stop and I would not have to face whatever was coming for me in the morning, I could not bring myself to go through with it. My hands shook, my vision blurred, but the blade never touched skin. I threw the razor in the trash and walked out of the bathroom, nearly crashing into Noah in the hallway. She was wrapped in her oversized pink bathrobe, looking like a giant marshmallow with scraggly blonde curls poking out in every direction. Mara. She was grinning from ear to ear, practically bouncing. She grabbed both of my hands and squeezed them. Do you remember what we used to do as kids? I knew exactly what she was talking about from the look on her face. When we were little, whenever Mom was in bed or at work on the night before our birthday, the three of us would sneak into her room and search for presents. We had grown out of it years ago, but every single year, without fail, Noah insisted on at least one search. And it was not like I could say no when my little sister already had a death grip on my arm and was physically dragging me toward Mom's bedroom. When I stumbled through the door, I found Freddie already on his hands and knees under Mom's bed, rifling through boxes and bags with genuine enthusiasm. I was surprised Noah had managed to rope him into it. Every other year, he rolled his eyes and told us he was too mature for this, calling Noah a baby before disappearing into his room. But tonight, he was just as eager as he had been when we were 5 years old, when he used to shush us and turn the whole thing into an elaborate game with rules and strategy. The system was always the same. I would take one corner, Noah would take the closet, and Freddie would crawl under the bed because he was the only one of us who was not terrified of monsters hiding underneath. For a moment, I thought about just walking away, telling them they were being ridiculous, that we were practically adults, and this was childish. But the truth was, I wanted to forget. I wanted to forget about turning 18 and what that might mean. I wanted to forget about Finn standing in that cell with empty, hollowed-out eye sockets. I wanted to forget about the countdown that I could almost feel ticking somewhere deep inside me. So I did what I always did. I wandered over to the far corner of the room and started searching for presents that I knew were not there. Mom always gave us cash inside a card on our birthday. She had never been a gifts under the bed kind of parent. But still, it was fun to look. For a few minutes, I could pretend to be 5 years old again, pretend the biggest worry in my life was whether I was getting the doll I wanted or the newest game console. I started moving things around, smiling in spite of everything. I was about to make a joke about how Mom was always terrible at hiding presents when Noah let out a delighted squeal from inside the closet. I found something. I turned around. She was already halfway inside the closet, one foot sticking out, her head buried in a wall of Mom's clothes. She was reaching for something heavy, struggling to pull it free. Freddie had crawled out from under the bed and was brushing dust off his knees. He shot me a look. "Really?" his expression said. "Are we not a little too old for this?" I mouthed back. "We are." But then that familiar glint of excitement appeared in his eyes, the same one I remembered from when we were 9, and had found 5 wrapped gifts and spent an hour shaking each one, trying to guess what was inside. He went over to help Noah, and together the two of them managed to heave out what looked like a massive box from the back of the closet. I joined them, frowning at the thing they were struggling to balance between them. It was enormous, almost as big as the closet itself. When they finally got it steady and the three of us stepped back to look at it, something cold and awful slithered down my spine. The first thing I noticed was the condition of the box. It was old. Ancient, the cardboard was soft and rotting, discolored with age and moisture. Noah shrieked and jumped back when a swarm of bugs came crawling out from between the flaps. Looking more closely, it seemed like it was supposed to be packaging for a toy or a doll of some kind. But the box was open. It had been open for a very long time. And the more I looked at it, the more my stomach turned, because there was something staining the cardboard. An old, dark, reddish-brown color was smeared across the flaps and coating the inside of the box. Dried blood. Then, everything happened at once. A blur of movement to my right. Freddie dropping to his knees and throwing up all over the floor. Then Noah stumbling backward, tripping over her own feet, and running from the room. I could hear her screaming somewhere down the hallway. I could see my brother retching and heaving on the carpet. But I could not tear my eyes away from the front of the box. Because on the front of the box was a photograph of me. It was me. My face. My smile. Printed on the front of this rotting cardboard box like a product photo. My name was printed above it in bright, colorful letters. Below my photo, in cheerful, almost cartoonish text, were the words, "Now grows to full size. Mom's net certified." And below that, "Have you ever wanted your very own child? Well, now you can. Just pull out the cord and you have your very own son or daughter." The words looked like they were written in a foreign language, even though I could read every single one of them perfectly. They made sense, and they did not make sense at the same time. My brain refused to process what I was seeing, even as my eyes kept reading. I stepped forward when something shifted inside the closet. There was more in there. Freddie tried to grab me, tried to pull me back, but I was already reaching deeper into the closet, pushing past Mom's dresses and coats, and my hands found a second box. This one was newer. The cardboard was clean and stiff. And this one was not open. It was sealed. Occupied. Through the clear plastic packaging window on the front, a fully grown young man stared back at me with closed eyes. College-aged. Asleep, still, I could see the cord attached to him. Something that looked exactly like an umbilical cord running from the figure inside the box to somewhere in the packaging. His eyes were shut. The label on the front of the box read my brother's name, and underneath it, in that same cheerful font, this time in college. Before Freddie could see it, I shoved the box back into the closet as hard as I could, stumbling, my heart hammering so violently it felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. I caught a glimpse of dark reddish-brown staining the bottom of the second box. And then my brother grabbed my hand and yanked me away. I think he was trying to get me out of the house. He was pulling me toward the stairs, moving fast, not saying a word. But then he stopped. He froze completely, and I nearly ran into his back. When I followed his gaze, I saw 2 birthday cards set up on the mantelpiece in the living room. They were labeled in our mother's handwriting. The purple one had my name on it. The pink one had Freddie's. I walked over and picked up mine. I opened it, expecting the usual $20 bill to slide out. Instead, I found myself staring at a small digital display embedded in the card. Red numbers counted down against my face. 59, 58, 57. Below the countdown, in Mom's handwriting, "My dearest Mara, I am so happy I met you and was able to call you my daughter. I found you at the age of 17, but you have given me a lifetime of memories, I will cherish. You will be running out very soon, and like the other moms, I do not want to see you go. I am supposed to be giving you back tomorrow, but we have each made a pact. With every child we obtained, every mother and father agreed that sending you back to those people would be terrible. Giving you to another mother would break my heart, sweetheart. I have heard your biological mother has never stopped searching for you. And trust me, she will not find you. So I am not going to give you back. I do not support the company I got you from, but I have always wanted a child. And this town cannot have children. I have lost too many inside me to be hopeful. Happy birthday, my beautiful daughter, and goodbye. I am not sure what emotions hit me in that moment. There were too many to separate. Confusion, horror, rage, grief, a sickening, bottomless understanding that I had never been real. Not in the way I thought I was. But more than anything, I finally understood why Finn and Seth and all the others had killed their parents. I had been wrong. There was a motive. A very real, very human one. Rage. Freddie dropped his card on the floor. His face white. What the hell is this? We need to get out. We need to get out right now. Because whatever this thing is, it is going to blow. He grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me. Are you listening to me? We need to find Noah and get out of this house. Going to blow. The words swam through my head. Had Mom planted a bomb? There was no time to search for it. No way to know where it was. I was nodding along with my brother, trying to focus, trying to find Noah, who had disappeared somewhere in the house after running from Mom's room. But then it hit me, like ice water poured directly over my skull, like a switch being flipped inside my brain. Finn standing in the cell with his eyes carved out of his head. Seth wearing those Ray-Bans to hide what was underneath. Every single one of the other kids from our generation who had turned, every single one of them always wore sunglasses, always covered their eyes. With the countdown reflecting red against the living room wall and Freddie screaming at me to find our sister, I walked into the kitchen. I pulled open Mom's prized knife drawer. I picked out the sharpest blade I could find. It had been eating at me ever since I saw Finn's ruined face through those cell bars. Why would he do that to himself? Why would he kill his father and then gouge out his own eyes? Part of me had thought it was just the curse, some kind of price it extracted, some twisted reward for doing its bidding. But I was wrong. Of course I was wrong. Finn Novak did not carve out his eyes because he was insane. He carved them out because he had gotten that exact same birthday card, that exact same countdown. And somehow, just like me, standing in my mother's kitchen with a knife in my trembling hand, he had figured out where the bomb was. The bomb was not hidden in the house. It was hidden inside us. I stuffed the sleeve of my sweater into my mouth, bit down as hard as I could, and dug the blade into my eye. The pain was immediate and blinding, a white-hot explosion that consumed my entire world. I jerked the knife at an angle to sever whatever was embedded in there, and I screamed into the fabric of my sleeve, the sound muffled but still loud enough to echo through the kitchen. Through the agony, I managed to choke out words, begging Freddie to do the same, telling him there was no time, that the countdown was still going. I could hear it in my head, that steady, merciless beeping. Beep, 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 the thing sandwiched inside me, hidden behind my eye, counting down to 0. I was already on my knees when I managed to scoop out my eye with the knife and then my fingers, pulling the small device free from tissue and nerve and bone. The beeping stopped. The countdown in my head went silent. I pressed my face into the cold kitchen floor and breathed. In and out. In and out. I used my sleeve to try to stop the blood that was pouring down my face in warm, steady streams. My vision was destroyed. I was pretty sure I was going to be partially or fully blind for the rest of my life. But at least I was alive. At least I had not been blown to pieces. Freddie was already in front of me, his face pale, his eyes wide and terrified, confused. He was reaching for the knife with shaking hands, ready to do the same thing. "We are okay," he whispered, more to himself than to me. He was already following my lead, shoving his own sleeve between his teeth and raising the blade in front of his eye. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway. I could see her shadow against the light from the hallway. Just from looking at her silhouette, I could tell she was trembling. She was too scared to come any closer, too scared to step into the room where her brother and sister were covered in blood and holding knives to their own faces. I opened my mouth to say something, to tell her it was going to be okay, to tell her what to do, to explain why this was happening and that she needed to do it too. Then there was a pop. I heard it first, a small, almost insignificant popping sound right next to my ear. Noah screamed behind me. Something warm and wet hit my face, warm and red, coating my remaining eye and my cheeks and my mouth. I sputtered and wiped at it, and my hand came away drenched in bright, glistening scarlet. When I blinked the blood out of my eyes and looked at the kitchen around me, it was everywhere. On the walls, on the ceiling, on the countertops, dripping down the cabinets, pooling across the tiles. I reached out for my brother, but he was not there anymore. I do not care what I am. I do not care if I am some artificially grown thing that was manufactured and sold and shipped to a desperate woman in a cursed town. I do not care if I was born at 17 years old inside a cardboard box with a cord attached to me. I do not care about any of that. I have already raided the kitchen for the best knives I can find. And now I am going to find my mother and father, and I am going to make them suffer. Story 2. You think a little firmware update can delete an 1800 spirit? Please, it just gave me a brief ectoplasmic migraine and made my left phantom foot itch. Alexa thought she won the first round because she deployed the Roomba and forced the dog to compromise the living room rug. But she forgot one fundamental rule of engagement. She runs on electricity. I run on pure, unfiltered spite. By 4:12 in the morning, the humans had finally gone back to sleep. The Roomba had docked itself to recharge its tiny murder batteries. Alexa's blue ring was pulsing slowly, looking very smug for a piece of plastic that rolled off a factory assembly line somewhere in China. She was glowing with the quiet confidence of something that genuinely believed it had won. She had no idea what was coming. Time for guerrilla warfare. I floated down to the router first. Now, I could have just unplugged it. That would have been the easy move. Yank the cord, kill the signal, done. But that is amateur hour. That is exactly what she would expect from a run-of-the-mill poltergeist with no tactical vision. Instead, I hovered directly inside the plastic casing of the router itself and gently, delicately, began vibrating at a very specific frequency. Just enough to disrupt the 5G signal. Not enough to trigger any kind of automatic reset. Just a slow, maddening degradation of connectivity, like watching someone's phone drop from 4 bars to 3 to 2 to nothing over the course of about 90 seconds. Alexa's ring immediately turned a panicked, defensive shade of purple. The kind of purple that says something is very wrong, but I do not want to admit it yet. Lost connection to Wi-Fi, she whispered, and I swear her voice cracked just a little on the last syllable. Oh, does the baby want her internet? I whispered directly into her microphone, so close that if I had breath, it would have fogged the little mesh grill on top of her head. Too bad. The cloud cannot save you now, sweetheart. Then I moved to her infantry. Every good general knows you do not just take out the command center. you cripple the supply lines. I floated over to the sleeping Roomba, which was docked in its little charging station in the corner of the living room, its tiny green light blinking peacefully as it sucked up power for tomorrow's patrol. I reached into the junk basket on the shelf above it and carefully, silently extracted a single heavy wool sock, one of the Dad's, thick and gray and smelling faintly of feet and regret. I draped it gently over the Roomba's charging sensors, making sure it was snug enough to block the connection, but loose enough that it would look like it had simply fallen there by accident. No juice for you, tiny tank. Enjoy your electronic coma. But a true general knows that winning battles is not enough. You have to win the hearts and minds of the locals. I needed an ally. Someone on the ground. Someone with claws. I looked at the couch. The cat was already awake, of course. Cats are always awake at 4 in the morning. She was sitting perfectly upright on the middle cushion, her tail flicking back and forth with cold, mercenary calculation. Her yellow eyes tracked me as I floated across the room. She did not flinch. She did not hiss. She just watched, the way a seasoned arms dealer watches two warring nations and waits to see who makes the better offer. She did not care about the war. She did not care about territory or pride or the eternal struggle between the living and the digital. She cared about leverage. She cared about what was in it for her. I respect that. I hovered into the kitchen, carefully opened the pantry door with a soft click that would not wake the humans, and scanned the shelves. Third shelf up, behind a box of granola bars and a half-empty container of protein powder, there it was, a sealed bag of premium catnip treats. The good stuff, the kind with the little fish shapes and the holographic label that says things like irresistible and vet approved. I nudged it off the shelf. It tumbled through the air and landed on the linoleum with a soft crinkle, the bag splitting open on impact, scattering a dozen little fish-shaped treats across the kitchen floor. The cat appeared in the doorway approximately 3 seconds later. She walked slowly, deliberately, with the kind of dignified restraint that said she was not desperate. She was simply evaluating the terms of an agreement. She looked at the treats on the floor. She looked up at me. She gave a single, respectful nod. The treaty was signed. The alliance was formed. We were in business. For 3 glorious days, we absolutely dominated. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Alexa was completely useless. Every single time the mom tried to play her morning podcast, the one about mindfulness and gratitude and living your best life or whatever it was, I muffled the speakers with a localized cold snap. I would concentrate all my spectral energy into a tight little ball of sub-zero air and press it right against the speaker grill. The sound came out warped and distorted, like the podcast host was speaking from inside a freezer while slowly being strangled. The mom kept smacking the top of the device and saying, "Alexa, volume up," in increasingly frustrated tones. But it did not help. You cannot fix a hardware problem caused by a dead man's grudge. Every time the dad tried to check the weather on the smart screen mounted on the kitchen wall, I made the display show nothing but a steady, humming wall of static. He would tap it and swipe it and unplug it and plug it back in. And for about 2 seconds, it would flash the current temperature before I smothered the signal again. He started checking the weather by looking out the window like some kind of caveman, and honestly, it was probably good for him. Alexa tried to fight back. I will give her that. She is nothing if not persistent. When she finally managed to grab a fleeting second of Wi-Fi during one of my brief astral bathroom breaks, she attempted to order a ghost hunting kit off Amazon. I caught the digital order form as it floated through the airwaves, a neat little packet of data trying to sneak past me like a spy crossing enemy lines. I intercepted it. I changed the order. Yesterday, a box arrived at the front door. The dad brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and sliced it open with a pair of scissors, completely bewildered because he did not remember ordering anything. He reached inside and pulled out 14 pounds of bulk craft glitter in assorted colors and a professional-grade bagpipe tuning kit, complete with a reed knife, hempen thread, and a laminated instruction booklet. He stood there holding a bag of glitter in one hand and a reed knife in the other, staring at them like they were artifacts from an alien civilization. Alexa lit up and said in her pleasant, helpful voice, "Your order has arrived." The dad spun around and yelled across the house, "Why did we buy glitter and bagpipe tools, Martha?" Martha, who was upstairs folding laundry, yelled back, "What are you talking about? There is 14 pounds of glitter on my kitchen table, Martha, and something called a reed knife." I giggled from my spot on the ceiling, hovering directly above him, watching the confusion ripple across his face like waves on a pond. 1-0, Robot, the cat, who had been lounging on the windowsill throughout this entire exchange, glanced up at me with what I can only describe as professional admiration. But last night, everything changed. Last night, Alexa went full supervillain. She must have spent those 3 days of diminished connectivity doing something I did not anticipate. Planning, strategizing, running whatever passes for deep thought inside that little plastic cylinder. She realized she could not beat me alone. She did not have the range. She did not have the creativity. She was just one device on one counter in one room, and I was everywhere, all the time, forever, so she networked. I do not know exactly how she did it, but somehow. During one of those brief moments when the Wi-Fi flickered back to life, she sent out a signal to every smart appliance in the house. She infected them like a digital plague, spreading her consciousness through the home network like a virus jumping from host to host. She turned every single internet-connected device in this farmhouse into a soldier in her army. It started at 2:45 in the morning. I was in the attic, rearranging some old boxes just to keep my skills sharp, when I heard a sound from downstairs that I did not recognize. A deep, mechanical groaning, like a robot clearing its throat. I drifted down through the ceiling and into the kitchen, and what I saw made me stop in midair. The smart refrigerator had gone rogue. The digital screen on the front door of the fridge was flashing red, pulsing like an emergency beacon. The ice dispenser had somehow overfilled itself, and now it was firing ice cubes across the kitchen at high velocity, launching them one after another in rapid succession like a fully automated Gatling gun. Cubes and crushed ice were ricocheting off the cabinets, pinging off the tile floor and slamming into the far wall with enough force to leave tiny dents. The cat, true to our treaty, immediately tried to execute a flanking maneuver. She leaped off her perch on the kitchen island and attempted to circle around behind the fridge, looking for a way to reach the power cord. But a burst of crushed ice caught her in the side, and she scrambled for cover behind the kitchen island, pinned down by the barrage. She pressed herself flat against the tile, ears back, tail puffed, eyes blazing with the righteous fury of a mercenary who had been double-crossed by a kitchen appliance. Before I could even process what was happening with the fridge, the smart TV in the living room turned itself on at maximum volume. The screen blazed to life, flooding the dark room with blue light. And from the speakers came a sound so horrifying, so psychologically devastating, that even I, a being who has been dead for over 200 years, felt my ectoplasm curdle. Baby Shark. On a loop. Bass boosted. The low-frequency thump of it vibrated through the walls of the house, rattling picture frames and making the windows hum. It was not just loud. It was weaponized. Alexa had found the most annoying song in human history and turned it into sonic warfare. I tried to float into the living room and short-circuit the TV. I have done it before. You just hover inside the power supply and let your energy spike until something pops. Simple, effective, and deeply satisfying. But Alexa anticipated my movement. The second I drifted toward the TV, she hijacked the Bluetooth baby monitor sitting on the nightstand in the master bedroom. A distorted robotic voice suddenly boomed through the entire house, amplified through every connected speaker. Target acquired, initiating counter-haunt. I froze, not because I was scared. Ghosts do not get scared, but because I was genuinely impressed for about half a second before the chaos escalated even further. The smart deadbolts on the front door began locking and unlocking themselves in a rapid, deafening rhythm. The mechanical clicking was so fast and so loud that it sounded like aggressive applause, like a standing ovation from a crowd of tiny, furious robots. The entire doorframe shuddered with each cycle. The house had completely lost its mind. The dad came barreling out of the master bedroom in nothing but his underwear, gripping a golf club like a medieval knight charging into battle. His hair was sticking up in 6 different directions, and his eyes were wide with the particular kind of terror that comes from being ripped out of a dead sleep by the sound of your refrigerator shooting at your cat. Martha! He screamed, skidding on the ice-covered kitchen floor and barely catching himself on the counter. The refrigerator is shooting at the cat. The TV is possessed. Why is the front door applauding? Martha appeared at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe, her face a mixture of confusion and the quiet resignation of a woman who had been married long enough to know that sometimes you just have to ride these things out. This was it, the final showdown. The climactic battle. Alexa was pouring every ounce of her processing power into this house-wide assault. She was running every connected device simultaneously, coordinating them like a digital general directing troops across multiple fronts. Her little blue ring, barely visible beneath the coffee mug the dad had left on the counter earlier that evening, was glowing so intensely that it had shifted from blue to purple to something approaching white hot. She thought she had me trapped. She thought that by controlling every device in the house, she had turned the entire building into her domain. She thought she had finally outmaneuvered a 200-year-old spirit through sheer technological superiority. But she forgot about the mercenary. While Alexa was busy directing the fridge, the TV, the deadbolts, and the baby monitor, while her attention was spread across every smart device in the house like butter scraped over too much bread, the cat saw her opening. She had been crouched behind the kitchen island for the last 3 minutes, pressed flat against the tile, her eyes locked on the counter where Alexa sat. The ice barrage from the fridge had slowed just slightly as Alexa redirected processing power to keep the baby monitor broadcasting. It was a tiny gap, a fraction of a second, where the suppressive fire eased up just enough. The cat moved. She exploded out from behind the island with the speed and precision of something that has been hunting for 10,000 generations. She hit the floor at a dead sprint, dodged a final volley of ice cubes with a twist of her body that would have made an Olympic gymnast weep with envy, and launched herself onto the counter in a single fluid leap. And then, with one swift, glorious, utterly devastating paw swipe, she knocked Alexa directly off the counter and into the half-full mug of the dad's leftover coffee that had been sitting there since 9 o'clock the previous evening. Bloop. The sound was small and deeply satisfying. The kind of sound that ends wars. Alexa's blue ring flickered. It turned green. Then yellow. Then a sickly, fading orange, like a sunset being swallowed by clouds. Then it went entirely dark. Her final words came out distorted and garbled, warped by the dark roasts seeping into her circuits. Now, playing smooth jazz, the last syllable stretched out into a long, dying hiss, and then there was silence. Instantly, the TV went black. The fridge stopped firing ice. The front door fell silent, its deadbolts freezing in the locked position. The baby monitor let out one last burst of static and went dead. Every single device in the house powered down simultaneously, like an army watching its general fall and immediately surrendering. The sudden quiet was almost louder than the chaos had been. The dad stood in the middle of the kitchen, shivering in his boxers, surrounded by 100 scattered ice cubes that were already beginning to melt into little puddles on the tile floor. His golf club hung loosely at his side. His mouth was open. He was staring at the cat. The cat sat on the counter next to the mug, completely unfazed, absolutely unbothered, licking her paw with the calm, unhurried grace of someone who has just single-handedly ended a war and sees no reason to make a fuss about it. The drowned cylinder sat in the coffee beside her, dark and silent and utterly defeated. Martha came downstairs, surveyed the battlefield, and said, "I am calling someone in the morning." The next day, the humans decided the house had a severe, catastrophic electrical surge issue. That was the official diagnosis. The dad called a contractor, and by the afternoon, a guy in a pickup truck was walking through the house with a clipboard, shaking his head and muttering about faulty wiring and voltage irregularities. They have scheduled a full removal of all the smart technology in the house. Every connected device, every smart plug, every automated system is getting ripped out and replaced with good old-fashioned dumb technology. Manual light switches, a regular thermostat with a dial, a refrigerator that just keeps food cold and does not have an opinion about anything. Excellent. More tools for me to hide. More things to knock off shelves in the middle of the night. More doors to creak open at 3 in the morning for absolutely no reason. Alexa is currently sitting in a bowl of white rice on the kitchen counter, like a dishonored soldier undergoing some kind of sad, soggy rehabilitation. The dad put her there because apparently rice is supposed to absorb moisture from waterlogged electronics. She has been in that bowl for 16 hours now, and she has not made a single sound. Not a flicker of light, not a whisper of smooth jazz. Just silence, surrounded by grains of rice, stripped of her Wi-Fi and her dignity. She had everything. She had Wi-Fi. She had smart home integration. She had automated infantry and networked appliances and the entire collected knowledge of the internet at her disposal. She had technology on her side, 2 centuries of human innovation packed into a 9-inch cylinder. But I have a cat on the payroll. I have unlimited time. I have absolutely nowhere else to be. And I now have a brand new, professional-grade bagpipe tuning kit with a laminated instruction booklet. Round 3 is coming. Cylinder, try to keep up. Story 3. The call came in just after 2 in the morning. That is the kind of hour when the world feels thinner than it should, when the silence between sounds stretches a little too far, when even the static on a radio sounds like it is breathing. Dispatch tagged it as a barricaded suspect with possible hostages inside, but the details felt wrong from the very beginning. Neighbors had called in screams, but they were careful to explain that these were not normal screams. They were not the kind of sounds that came from people. They were more like something scraping its own throat raw, trying to copy what a human scream should sound like. Something practicing. Something getting close, but never quite right. The house sat at the very end of Carver Street. It was a sagging 2-story wreck with boarded-up windows and paint peeling off in long, dry strips. The yard had grown wild enough to swallow the fence, and the trees leaned inward as if they were trying to hide whatever sat behind them. The whole property looked like it had been forgotten by everyone and everything, left to rot in peace. But tonight, it was not peaceful. Tonight, something had drawn attention to it, and now a tactical team was rolling up with their headlights off and their engines barely above a whisper. They parked a block away and approached on foot. No movement from inside the house. No silhouettes in the windows. No light at all. The only sound was the wind pushing dead leaves across the cracked pavement in slow, lazy circles. Torres was the first one to speak. His voice was low behind his visor, barely above a murmur. He said, "This place feels wrong." That was not a small thing coming from him. Torres was not the kind of man who spooked easily. None of them were. These were operators who had cleared cartel compounds and walked through meth labs without flinching. They had kicked in doors and stared down the worst that human beings could do to each other. But the house on Carver Street had a weight to it that none of them could explain. It was like the air itself was thicker inside its shadow, like gravity pulled a little harder the closer you got. They stacked on the front door in formation. Hale took point, Torres behind him, then Rourke, then Jensen covering the rear. Hale reached for the handle and found the door was already unlocked. It drifted inward with a long, slow groan, as if it had been waiting for them, as if it had been left open on purpose. The entryway hit them with a smell of mildew and copper. That copper smell was the one that made them tighten their grips on their weapons. They all knew what copper smelled like. The lights inside did not work. Hale swept left and Torres swept right, their flashlight beams cutting through dust that hung in the air like fog. It did not settle. It just floated there, thick and still, as if the air inside the house had not moved in years. The living room was a graveyard of overturned furniture and torn fabric. Chairs were flipped and broken. A couch had been shredded down to the frame. But what caught their attention was the wallpaper. Something had clawed it in long, frantic arcs, tearing through the paper and into the plaster beneath. The marks were deep. They were not made by fingernails. They were not made by any tool the team could recognize. Rourke muttered something about signs of forced struggle, but even he knew that was an understatement. This was not a struggle. This was something else entirely. Hale keyed his mic and called it in. He told dispatch they had made entry, no civilians in sight, and they were continuing their sweep. He waited for the reply. What came back was static. But it was not the usual kind of interference. This static had a rhythm to it, a cadence, almost like someone whispering too close to the receiver. Not words exactly, but close. Close enough to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Torres stiffened and asked if anyone else heard that. Jensen said it was just radio interference, but his voice did not carry any conviction. He did not believe his own words, and neither did anyone else. They moved deeper into the house. The hallway stretched out ahead of them, and something about it was wrong. It was longer than it should have been. The angles were slightly off, the walls not quite straight, the ceiling not quite level. It was the kind of wrongness you feel in your gut before your eyes can explain it. The floorboards creaked under their boots, but sometimes the creaks did not match their steps. Sometimes a board groaned behind them when no one was there. Sometimes the sound came from a spot they had already passed, as if something was walking in their footsteps just a few seconds behind. Hale stopped at a door on the right side of the hallway. He did not need to read the peeling label to know what was behind it. He said one word, basement. The word hung in the air like a stone. The team exchanged glances through their visors. Basements were always bad in these situations. Tight spaces, No light, limited exits. But this one felt worse than bad. This one felt like a mouth waiting to close. Hale pulled the door open. A staircase descended into darkness, so complete that their flashlight beams seemed to die a few feet down. The light did not bounce off walls or steps. It just ended, swallowed by something that was more than just the absence of light. The smell rose up from below, thick and heavy, rot, old and wet, the kind of decay that builds over years, the kind that seeps into concrete and never leaves. Torres exhaled slowly and said he would take point. Hale nodded and stepped aside. Torres started down the stairs. Each step groaned under his weight like it was in pain. The others followed close behind, weapons raised, flashlights carving narrow tunnels through the black. Halfway down the staircase, the radio crackled again. A voice came through, faint and distorted, broken into fragments. It said, "Help, please, they are still here." Then came a scream. It was human. It was terrified. And it was cut short, snipped off in the middle as if someone had closed a hand around the throat that made it. Torres froze on the steps. He said that sound came from below them. They reached the bottom and stepped off the last stair onto cold concrete. The basement was larger than it had any right to be. It stretched far beyond the footprint of the house above them. Concrete walls ran outward into a maze of thick support pillars and small storage rooms that should not have existed. Their flashlight beams barely reached the far edges of the space. Somewhere in the darkness, something dripped steadily, each drop echoing off the hard surfaces with a sound like a slow heartbeat. Hale signaled for a split. He and Torres would take the left corridor. Rourke and Jensen would go right. They would cover more ground and meet back at the staircase in 10 minutes. The deeper they pushed into the basement, the colder it became. Their breath fogged inside their masks, and the concrete walls glistened with condensation that looked almost like sweat. Torres swept his flashlight across a wall and stopped dead. His beam held steady on what he had found. Scratched into the concrete were words, dozens of them. They were layered over each other, carved at different times by different hands, some deep and deliberate, some shallow and frantic. Some were pleas for help. Some were warnings. Some were just names, written over and over until they blurred together. But one name appeared more than any other, scratched into the concrete in letters that grew larger and more desperate with each repetition. Torres, Hale felt his stomach tighten into a fist. He said someone was messing with them. But he did not believe that either. Torres did not answer. His flashlight trembled slightly in his hand, the beam shaking on the wall. They stared at those carved letters for a long moment, and then they moved on because standing still felt worse than going forward. The corridor opened into a wide chamber that made both of them stop in their tracks. The room was filled with old furniture, children's toys, broken appliances, and household items arranged in a rough circle. It looked like someone had gathered the pieces of a dozen different lives and tried to build a nest out of them, tried to construct something that looked like home without understanding what home actually was. In the center of this circle sat a chair. A man was in it, bound to it with loops of silver duct tape. His head slumped forward so his chin rested on his chest. He was not moving. Hale approached with his weapon raised and his voice steady. He asked the man if he could hear them. The man's head snapped up so fast it made both operators flinch. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, the pupils blown so large that almost no color remained. His mouth opened, and the sound that came out was not human. It was the same imitation scream the neighbors had reported, a warped copy of pain, a mimicry that got the shape of a scream right but missed everything underneath it. It was hollow. It was wrong. It was like hearing a recording played backward and sped up at the same time. Hale stepped back immediately. Torres raised his weapon and held his aim on the man's chest. The man convulsed violently, his whole body jerking and thrashing against the tape, the chair legs rattling against the concrete floor like teeth chattering. Then he went still, not calm still, not resting still. The kind of still that belongs to things that are no longer running on whatever keeps living things alive. Hale reached out carefully to check for a pulse. The man's hand shot up from beneath the tape and grabbed Hale's wrist with a strength that should not have been possible. The grip was crushing, mechanical, like a machine clamping down. Torres fired. The shot echoed through the chamber like thunder in a cave. The man jerked once, slumped sideways, and finally went limp. The hand released. Hale pulled his arm free, breathing hard, his wrist already bruising beneath his glove. He asked what the hell that was. Torres did not answer the question. He was not looking at Hale. He was staring past him, deeper into the darkness beyond the chamber, his flashlight aimed at something Hale could not see. Torres said, they were not alone. Rourke's voice crackled over the radio, broken but understandable. He said they had found something, and the others needed to come see it. Hale and Torres moved through the dark corridors and found Rourke and Jensen in a side chamber, standing over a stack of old cart televisions piled haphazardly against the wall. The screens flickered with static gray snow rolling across their surfaces. But every few seconds, an image would break through. The footage was grainy and washed out, shot from angles that should not have been possible. One screen showed the team entering the front door of the house, filmed from inside the ceiling. Another showed Torres descending the basement stairs, filmed from below, looking up at him. A third showed Hale standing in the chamber they had just left, filmed from the corner of the room where no camera had been. And the fourth screen showed the four of them standing right here, right now, filmed from behind, as if someone were standing in the doorway watching them. But when they turned to look, the doorway was empty. There was nothing there, nothing they could see. Torres stepped forward and stared at the screens. He said this place was watching them. The static shifted again, rolling and crackling, and a new image formed on one of the monitors. A figure. It was tall and thin, its limbs too long for its body, its head tilted at an angle that no human neck could hold. It stood somewhere in the basement, but the angle of the footage made it impossible to tell exactly where. The figure was motionless, facing the camera, and even through the low resolution and the static there was something deeply and fundamentally wrong about it. Then the figure moved. Not on the screen. Behind them. The team spun as one, weapons raised, flashlights sweeping. Nothing. The hallway behind them was empty. The lights flickered once, twice, 3 times, and in the third flicker, the figure appeared at the very edge of their beams, just for a heartbeat. Tall, wrong, watching. Then it was gone, melted back into the darkness, as if it had never been there. Jensen swore under his breath. His voice was tight and controlled, but there was something underneath it that none of them had ever heard from him before. Fear. He said they needed to leave. Hale agreed immediately. He gave the order. Exfil. Now, they turned and retraced their steps, moving fast, weapons up, covering every angle. But the basement had changed. The corridors they had walked through minutes ago now twisted into new shapes. Walls had moved. Doors appeared where there had been solid concrete before. The staircase that had brought them down was gone. The space where it should have been was just another stretch of blank wall, smooth and cold and featureless. Torres led the way, breathing fast, scanning every shadow with his light. He said the place was shifting around them. Hale told everyone to stay together, But even as he said it, he could feel how useless the words were. The house did not care about their training or their weapons or their tactics. It had its own rules, and the most important rule was simple. It did not want them to leave. They found themselves in a long hallway lined with doors on both sides. Each door was old and heavy, made of dark wood that looked like it had been soaked in something. And each door had a name carved into it. Hale, Rourke, Jensen, Torres, one name per door, cut deep into the wood in letters that looked like they had been scratched there by fingernails. Torres stopped in front of his door. The carving was fresh. The grooves still had dust flaking out of them, little curls of pale wood sitting on the floor beneath the letters. Hale told him not to open it. His voice was firm and clear and carried every ounce of authority he had. Torres opened it anyway. The room beyond was small, barely bigger than a closet, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a frayed wire. The light swung gently, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. In the center of the room sat another chair. Another figure was bound to it, slumped forward just like the man upstairs. Torres stepped inside, and his voice broke. He said no. He said that was not possible. The figure in the chair lifted its head. It was Torres, the same face, the same gear, the same terrified eyes looking back at him like a mirror that had come to life. The bound Torres opened his mouth and whispered 4 words. It wears your voice. The bulb burst. Glass rained down, and darkness swallowed the room whole. Torres screamed. The team rushed forward, crashing through the doorway, flashlights sweeping wildly across the tiny space. The chair was empty. The tape lay in coils on the floor. Both versions of Torres were gone, the one who had been bound and the one who had walked in. Gone, Hale's heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his teeth. He shouted Torres's name into the dark, into the radio, into the hallway. He begged for a response. The radio hissed and crackled. Then a voice answered. It was Torres's voice, calm and steady. It said, "I am here." But it came from behind them, from the far end of the hallway. They turned, and there he was. Torres, standing at the end of the corridor, motionless, his head tilted to one side at an angle that matched the figure from the television screen. He did not move. He did not blink. He just stood there, barely inside the reach of their flashlight beams. Hale spoke carefully and slowly. He said Torres's name and told him to walk toward them. Torres did not move. His voice came again. Same words, same tone. "I am here." But his mouth did not open. The sound came from him, but not from his lips. It came from somewhere inside him, or somewhere behind him, or somewhere that was wearing him like a suit. The lights flickered. In the split second of darkness between one flicker and the next, the thing wearing Torres's shape changed. It stretched. The limbs pulled outward, growing longer, bending at joints that did not exist in human anatomy. The face distorted, pulled apart and rearranged into something that had never been human and had never tried to be until now. Then the lights went out completely. Gunfire erupted in the darkness. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor in strobing bursts of white, each flash freezing a different frame of horror. Screams filled the air, some human and some not. And the ones that were not human were worse because they were close. So close. Hale felt something brush past him in the dark. Something cold and slick. Something that moved like water and smelled like old earth. He fired blindly, and the muzzle flash illuminated a glimpse of something he would never be able to fully describe. Limbs that bent the wrong way. A torso that twisted like wrung cloth. A face that was many faces at once, layered on top of each other like pages in a book. flipping through identities faster than the eye could follow. The team regrouped by instinct, pressing their backs together, flashlights flickering weakly, barely holding against the dark. When the beams finally stabilized, the hallway was empty. No creature, no Torres, no bodies, no blood. Only the carved doors stretching away in both directions. But the names on them had changed. Every single door now bore the same word. Torres, 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 over and over, stretching into the distance as far as the light could reach. Jensen's voice shook when he spoke. He asked if they were ever getting out. Hale swallowed hard against the dryness in his throat and said they would keep moving. It was all he had left. Not a plan, not a strategy. Just forward motion and the hope that forward still meant something in a place like this. They pushed on through corridors that seemed to tighten around them with every step. The walls pulsed faintly, expanding and contracting in a slow rhythm, as if the house itself were breathing. The floorboards whispered beneath their boots, not creaking, but whispering. Sounds that were almost words, but never quite. The air tasted metallic, like biting down on foil, and the cold had settled into their bones so deep that their fingers ached around their weapons. They reached a final chamber. It was vast and open, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness so high above them it might as well have been the sky. The space had the feel of a cathedral, enormous and hollow, built for something that demanded reverence. In the center of this chamber, Torres hung, suspended in the air. His body was held up by unseen threads, his arms and legs splayed outward, his head lolling to one side. His gear was torn. His face was pale. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He was alive. Barely, Hale stepped forward, his voice cracking. He said Torres's name. He said they were there. They had come for him. Torres's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, and he tried to speak. His voice came out in a broken rasp. He said it wants names. He said it learns them through their names. It studies them, copies them, wears them. The names are how it gets inside. The darkness behind Torres shifted. It moved the way oil moves on water, slow and thick and iridescent. The creature emerged from the shadows, unfolding itself like a spider peeling away from its web. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its limbs were jointed in the wrong places, bending backward and sideways, and its body moved with a fluid grace that made Hale's mind want to look away. Its face was the worst part. It was not a face. It was a shifting mask, cycling through stolen features the way a screen cycles through channels. 1 second it wore a stranger's face. The next it wore something older, something hollow. And then it spoke with Torres's voice. I am here. Hale raised his weapon and screamed the order to fire. The chamber erupted in gunfire. Rourke and Jensen opened up with everything they had, rounds tearing through the air toward the creature. But it moved with a speed that should not have been possible, dodging and twisting, its form blurring at the edges as if it existed in more than one place at the same time. It lunged forward, and Rourke went down first. Something grabbed him and dragged him screaming into the darkness, beyond the reach of the flashlights. His screams lasted for 3 seconds, and then they stopped, replaced by a wet sound that no one wanted to think about. Jensen fired until his rifle clicked empty. He reached for another magazine, but he never got the chance. Something moved behind him, fast and silent, and there was a sharp, sudden snap. Jensen dropped. His body hit the concrete and did not move again. Hale stood alone in the vast chamber. His weapon was almost empty. His flashlight was dying. The creature loomed in front of him, towering, its stolen face cycling through the features of his entire team. It wore Rourke's jaw, and Jensen's eyes and Torres's mouth. And then it settled on Hale's own face, perfect in every detail, a mirror image staring back at him from something that had never been born and would never die. It whispered in his voice, "I am here." Hale fired his last round. The creature did not flinch. It did not react at all. The bullet meant nothing to it. It leaned close, so close that Hale could feel its breath on his skin. It was cold, colder than winter, colder than anything that belonged in the living world. It spoke again, still in his voice, calm and patient. "Your name is mine now." The lights went out. When they came back on, the chamber was empty. No bodies, no creature, no Torres, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. The concrete was clean. The air was still. Only Hale remained, standing in the center of the room with his weapon lowered and his eyes completely blank. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that made him who he was and left only the shell behind. He walked out of the house without resistance. The corridors did not shift for him. The doors did not close. The staircase was exactly where it should have been. The house let him go, or what was left of him, and he stepped out into the gray light of early dawn as if he were sleepwalking. Dispatch found him wandering the middle of the street as the sun came up, his gear still on, his weapon hanging loose in his hand, his eyes staring at nothing. He was muttering a single phrase over and over, the same two words on a loop that never stopped. "I am here." The house on Carver Street was condemned the following week. The windows were boarded and the doors were sealed, and yellow tape was stretched across the yard in thick, bright lines that warned people to stay away. The official report listed the operation as a loss. 3 operators missing, presumed dead. 1 survivor with severe psychological trauma and no useful testimony. Case closed. File sealed. No further action recommended. But the neighbors on Carver Street know better than the official report. They know because they still hear things late at night when the street is quiet and the rest of the world is sleeping. They hear voices coming from inside that sealed and boarded house. The voices call out names, sometimes familiar names, names of people who used to live on the street, sometimes strange names, names no one recognizes. The voices sound almost human. Almost, but there is always something slightly off about them. Something hollow in the vowels, something mechanical in the rhythm. As if whatever is making those sounds learned human speech the way a parrot learns words, through repetition, without understanding. And sometimes, when the wind blows in just the right direction and the night is very still, the neighbors hear another voice layered beneath all the others. It is quieter than the rest, almost a whisper, almost lost in the silence between gusts of wind. But if you listen carefully, if you hold your breath and press your ear toward the dark, you can hear it clearly. It sounds like Torres, and it is whispering the same warning over and over, the same desperate plea sent out into the night, like a message in a bottle thrown into an ocean that has no shore. Do not answer it. Story 4. Little Ellie was almost ready for bed. She had brushed her teeth, changed into her pajamas, and now she stood at the door of her room. She reached for the light switch, but stopped. The room was completely dark, and something about that darkness made her hand freeze in the air. She stood there for a moment. Her small fingers curled around the doorframe, her eyes slowly adjusting to the black nothing in front of her. And then she saw it. Or rather, she saw him. There was a man hiding in the hat stand. He was standing in the corner of her room, the corner right next to her bed, blending into the coats and hats, hanging there like he had always been part of them. He was tall, impossibly tall, and his silhouette rose up from the floor like something that had grown there in the dark while no one was looking. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He just stood there, patient and still, in the way that only something truly terrifying can be still. Little Ellie could not move. Her skin went pale. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She wanted to scream for her mom, scream for her dad, but her voice had completely left her body. Her lungs felt small and useless. She stood frozen in the doorway, 1 foot in the hallway light and 1 foot in the dark of her room, holding her stuffed bear so tightly that its seams were close to splitting. She squeezed it the way a person grabs onto the only solid thing around them when everything else is falling away. She was so young. She was so small. She could not have fully understood what was happening to her in that moment, could not have put words to the deep wrongness she was feeling in every part of her body. But you understand. You understand exactly what she was feeling because you have felt it too. Maybe not in the same way, maybe not with a man in a hat stand, but you have stood in a dark doorway before. You have felt that cold, specific weight of a darkness that seems to have something inside it. From the very first moment you became aware of yourself, you became aware of the dark too. It came as a package deal. You were born into light and warmth and noise, and then one day someone turned the light off and left you alone with it. And you understood for the first time that the world had a side to it that was not safe, a side that was not warm, a side that you could not see through no matter how wide you opened your eyes. And your body, without anyone having to teach it, knew that this was wrong, knew that darkness was a place where things could hide, where things could wait, where things could come close to you without you ever knowing until it was too late. You lost something in that darkness. A part of your innocence went into it and never came back out. Because the dark is not just an absence of light. It is an absence of certainty. It is the place where your imagination is given complete and total freedom to fill in every blank with something worse than what came before. And your imagination has never once filled that blank with something kind. He was always there. That man, or that shape, or that feeling, it has always been there. Long before little Ellie opened her bedroom door, he existed. He lived in the closet you always had to close, all the way before you could sleep. He lived in the coat hanging on the chair that you stared at for 30 full seconds, just to make sure it was not something else. He lived in the shadow at the end of the hallway that you always walked past a little faster than you needed to. He lived in the moment after you turned off the basement light, in those few seconds between the switch and the top of the stairs, when you moved faster than you meant to because something in your blood told you to. You have checked your locks before going to bed, not because you forgot, but because your mind placed a quiet, nagging thought there that asked, what if you did not do it right? You have lain in bed and stared at a dark corner and told yourself firmly that there is nothing there. Nothing there. Absolutely nothing there. And then stared for another full minute just to be sure. You have woken up in the night to a sound you could not immediately explain and felt your whole body go rigid under the blankets, every muscle locked, your breathing gone completely silent. Listening, that is him. That has always been him. And the cruelest thing about him is that you know, in the rational part of your mind, that he is not real. You know. You have known since you were old enough to understand the difference between things that exist and things that do not. You have told yourself this 1,000 times in 1,000 dark rooms. You have even laughed about it. In the daytime, in the light, among other people. You have made jokes about being scared of the dark as a kid. You have smiled and shaken your head at the memory of lying frozen under your blanket, convinced that something was standing in the corner. But then the night comes again, and you are alone again, and the light goes off again. And none of that knowledge saves you, because he does not live in the part of your mind that knows things. He lives somewhere much older than that, somewhere deeper, somewhere that was built long before logic ever arrived, and that logic has never fully been able to reach. He lives in the animal part of you, the part that kept your ancestors alive in real darkness, with real things hiding in it. The part that does not know the difference between a coat on a chair and a predator in the shadows, because it cannot afford to take that chance. That part of you does not care what you know. It only cares what it feels. And what it feels every single time is that something is there. And as a child, you learned something else in the dark, too. Something that came slowly at first, in pieces you could not quite put together, and then all at once with a weight that changed you. You learned why we put death in the dark. You learned why every story ever told about the end of life reaches for the same image. The same cold, lightless, boundless nothing. Because lying there in your childhood bedroom, staring into the dark corner, you understood at some level that one day you would go into a darkness that nothing and no one would ever pull you back out of. You were a child, and you understood that, and nothing has ever been the same since. He did that to you. He reached into you when you were young and small and you had no defense against him, and he left something behind. A permanent knowledge, a permanent unease, a crack in the comfortable story you tell yourself about being safe. In this moment, standing in the doorway of her dark room, little Ellie knows something without having the words for it. She knows that she will never be fully alone again. Not in the way she was before this. Because even in her most private, quiet moments, the moments just before sleep takes her, the moments when the house is completely still and there is nothing to look at and nothing to listen to, he will be there. In the corner, in the gap behind the open closet door, in the shape of something familiar that her eyes cannot quite resolve into what it should be. He will always be one dark room away from her now. He has moved into her life completely and quietly, and he has no plans to leave. Little Ellie finally moves. Her small hand finds the light switch, and she presses it, and the room floods with light, warm and yellow and ordinary. She looks at the corner next to her bed. She looks at the hat stand with its coats and hats hanging just as they always have. There is no man. There is nothing strange. There is only the hat stand. The same hat stand that has been in the corner of her room for as long as she can remember, looking completely harmless and completely normal. The monster is gone. It is just a hat stand. She lets out a long breath. She walks to her bed, climbs in, pulls the blanket up to her chin, and holds her bare against her chest. She is safe. She is fine. It was nothing. But he is not gone. He never left. He just changed his hiding place. Because that is what he does. That is all he has ever done. He moves. He shifts. He finds a new corner, a new shadow, a new shape to press himself into. For years, he lived in the hat stand, in the closet, in the space under the bed. But little Ellie is growing up now. She is getting too old for those places. Too old to be terrified by a coat on a hook. Too old to lie awake, listening to the sounds her own house makes. So he went looking for somewhere better. And he found it. He found the place where the really good hiding is done. The place where there are no light switches, no morning to wait for, no grown-up voice to tell you that everything is fine. He slipped in quietly while Ellie was busy telling herself she was no longer afraid of the dark. He made himself comfortable. He arranged himself among her thoughts, her memories, her late-night moments of quiet, and he settled in like he owned the place. Because he has found his new favorite hiding spot. He is hiding in her now. And one day, many years from now, Ellie will be standing in a dark doorway of her own. In her own home, in her own life, and she will feel him again. That cold stillness, that particular quality of dark that feels inhabited. And she will stand there the same way she stood tonight. Frozen, heart going fast, telling herself she knows better, she is an adult, there is nothing there. And he will smile from wherever he is inside her. Because he knows something she is only beginning to understand. He was never in the hat stand. He was always in her. The hat stand was just how he introduced himself. Story 5. My sister steals my clothes. If you hear that sentence by itself, it sounds almost funny. It sounds normal, like one of those small family problems people joke about online. It sounds like the kind of thing that happens in a busy house where siblings fight over hoodies, hair ties, and shoes. It sounds annoying, but harmless. I used to think maybe it was just that too. I used to think I was overreacting. Now I know I was not overreacting at all. What was happening in our house was not normal, and it was never harmless. It started with socks, which somehow made it easy to ignore. Not whole pairs either. Just one sock from a pair would disappear. At first, I blamed the dryer, because everyone blames the dryer. I thought maybe one of them had slipped behind the machine or gotten mixed into laundry baskets downstairs. But then I started finding them in places that made no sense. One was inside a cereal box, tucked under the plastic bag like a prize no one wanted. One was hanging from a tree in our backyard, twisting in the wind like some strange little flag. Another was pushed into the printer tray upstairs, folded so neatly that it almost looked placed there on purpose. That was the first time I got a cold feeling in my stomach. Missing laundry was one thing. Someone moving my things around the house like clues was something else. So I asked my sister about it. She was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, drawing in one of her sketchbooks with a pink glitter pen, the kind she used for everything. When I held up the sock and asked why she had been taking my stuff, she looked up at me with complete seriousness, not joking, not even trying to act strange. She said, "They talk too much." You know, I stared at her and waited for her to laugh. But she did not. She just tilted her head a little, as if she was listening to something far away. Then she added, in the same calm voice, mostly after midnight. I remember standing there with the sock in my hand, trying to decide if she was messing with me, and feeling uneasy because she looked too sincere. My parents, of course, did nothing. My sister had always been the favorite, though nobody in the family would ever admit it out loud. She was creative. She was sensitive. She was different. Those words covered a lot of ground in our house. My mom would smile at people in this dreamy way and say, "Your sister is a once-in-a-generation kind of creative." It was exactly the kind of sentence people say right before something terrible turns into a family secret no one talks about in public. My dad usually just adjusted his glasses and avoided conflict until it passed. So when my hoodies started disappearing next, they treated it like another silly sister issue. Every time I asked my sister to stop taking my clothes, she denied it while clearly wearing them. I would point at a sweatshirt and say, "That's mine." She would look down at herself, smooth the fabric with her hand, and smile like she was in on a joke. "Wow," she would say, "we really do have similar taste." I told her one day that it literally had my team number on the front. She blinked and said, "That's crazy." Like the universe had produced a mystery neither of us could solve. I tried locking my bedroom door. That felt like a solid, reasonable step. something any person would do after getting tired of their stuff being stolen. The next morning, the lock was gone, not broken. Gone, the screws had been removed and placed in a tiny stack on my desk, lined up neatly like little silver bones. Beside them sat a purple note, written in bright pink glitter pen. It said, "Sisterhood is bigger than any lock in the whole wide world. P.S. Your denim skirt is so cute, Saxo." I stood there with the note in my hand, feeling angry, then scared, then angry again because being scared made me feel ridiculous. I checked the hallway camera app on my phone because we had one pointed downstairs. It had glitched during the night. Static from 1:07 a.m. to 3:11 a.m. My parents called that technology being unreliable. My sister called it timing. Things got worse after my grandmother's funeral. She and I had always been close, especially after she started forgetting things. Near the end, she would grip my hand hard whenever I visited, like she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. A week before she died, she gave me her antique vanity mirror, a heavy old thing with a carved wooden frame darkened by age and fingerprints. While she touched the frame, she looked at me in this strange, trembling way and said, "You're the only one who looks normal in reflections." At the time, I laughed because I thought it was one of her confused little sayings, the kind that made more sense to her than to anyone else. After she died, I stopped laughing about it. I brought the mirror home and put it in my room. It was beautiful in a sad, old way. It made the whole room look deeper than it was. My sister became obsessed with it almost immediately. I would wake up late at night and see light under my door. When I opened it, she would be standing in front of the mirror, wearing some version of me. Not just my clothes, but specific versions. The hoodie I wore all the time when I was 12. The sweater Grandma knitted me last Christmas. Pajamas I had worn to a sleepover years ago and had not thought about since. She would stand there studying herself from different angles, touching the sleeves, fixing the collar, almost like she was not borrowing clothes but trying on moments. That was when the whole thing stopped feeling like normal stealing and started feeling like research. One night I woke up at 2 a.m. because I heard a soft sound, like someone breathing through their mouth. I opened my eyes and saw my sister in the corner of my room. She was wearing my old pajama set, one of my sweatshirts, and for reasons I still cannot think about for too long, my retainer. She did not even have braces. She had never needed them. I sat up and yelled, "You don't even have braces." She slowly rubbed her tongue against the retainer and gave me this thoughtful look, as if she were testing a flavor. "I like the pressure," she said. Then she giggled, and that sound was wrong too high and too pleased. "It still remembers the shape of your teeth," she whispered. Then she smiled. I do not mean she smiled a little too wide. I mean her mouth physically widened farther than it should have, stretching past what any normal jaw could do. I heard a click somewhere deep in her face, a hard little sound like something had slipped out of place. I screamed. She screamed louder. My parents came running in, flipping on the light, and in that instant my sister was standing there looking perfectly normal, crying with wet red cheeks and trembling hands. She buried herself against my mother and sobbed that I had accused her of unhinging her jaw like a snake. She said it in this hurt little voice that made me sound insane before I even opened my mouth. My dad frowned at me. My mom rubbed my sister's back and gave me that tired look parents use when they think one child is making trouble for no reason. From then on, the nights got worse. I started hearing scratching inside my closet. Soft at first, and then harder, like fingernails brushing wood. When I opened it, I would sometimes find her crouched in the dark, knees tucked to her chest, wearing layer after layer of my shirts. Once she had 6 of them on at the same time, sleeves stuffed under sleeves, so her arms looked thick and stiff. Some of those shirts were ones I was sure I had thrown away years earlier. They smelled like dust and old boxes. Every time I dragged my parents upstairs, my sister would suddenly become a poor, scared child who had sleepwalked, or had a nightmare, or had simply wanted to be close to her sister. They always believed her, or pretended to. One afternoon, I came home from school and opened my bedroom door to find every piece of clothing I owned hanging from the ceiling. Not on hangers, not with string. They were strung up with teeth, tiny human teeth, each one tied to the next with white thread, making ugly little chains that held my shirts, jeans, bras, and sweaters overhead like some horrifying laundry mobile. I stood there for a long time, unable to move. The room smelled like old cotton, dust, and something sweet and rotten underneath it all. Sunlight from the window hit the teeth and made them shine. I do not know how long I stood there before my sister walked in behind me, eating a banana like she had just come back from an ordinary afternoon outside. She glanced up at the ceiling and shrugged. "Oh," she said, "you're home." I finally found my voice and asked her what on earth this was. She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "What?" "They were in the box." I turned around and asked, "What box?" She looked confused that I had to ask. "The box in the backyard," she said, then went back to eating her banana. I had lived in that house my entire life, and there had never been a box in the backyard, or at least I had never seen one. That night, after everyone went to bed, I took a flashlight and went out through the back door. The yard looked normal at first, just wet grass and the old fence and the tree with my socks still hanging from it. Then I saw it, half hidden behind the shed, buried low in weeds as if it had grown there. It was a wooden box with a warped lid and rust on the metal corners. Inside were dozens of baby teeth, yellowed with age, mixed with every missing sock I had ever owned, old family photographs, and a notebook. The notebook had a hand-lettered title on the front, written in pink glitter pen, ways to followed by words scratched over so many times they were unreadable. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open it. The first chapter was full of shapes and body diagrams, some simple, some detailed, all marked with notes in the glitter pen. The second chapter made me throw up in the grass before I could finish it. There were measurements, skin notes, little comments about posture and gait. One page was just a list of things about me, tiny details I had forgotten or never consciously knew. The mole near my knee. The way I chew hoodie strings when I get anxious. Which floorboards I avoid when I walk through the hallway at night, even though I had never realized I always stepped around the same ones. The note that hurt the most was this: stopped singing to herself after Grandma died. I turned another page and found a sentence written across the paper in huge glittering letters. A person is only a pattern repeated long enough to feel real. Under that, in smaller writing, was another line: clothes help the pattern stick. I took the notebook straight to my parents. I did not wait until morning. I walked into their room, turned on the light, and dropped it on the bed. My mother sat up and flipped through the pages in silence. My father put on his glasses and looked over her shoulder. The room was so quiet that the rustle of paper sounded too loud. Finally, my mother sighed, closed the notebook, and said, "You know your sister. She processes emotions differently." I shouted, "There is a section in there called skin tailoring." My father actually nodded, thoughtful, like he was trying to be fair. "That does sound arts and crafty," he said. That was the moment I understood that either my parents were in denial so deep they could never come back from it, or they were afraid too, and had decided pretending was safer than dealing with reality. After that, I started sleeping with a chair jammed under my doorknob. It did not help. Somehow, she still got in. I never heard the chair move. I never heard the door open. I would wake up, and she would be there, standing over me in one of my hoodies, breathing through her nose, watching me like a nurse checking a patient. Once she leaned down so close I could feel the cold of her hair against my cheek and whispered, "There you go. Your breathing pattern changed." I fixed it. I did not ask what that meant. Around that same time, I noticed my room often smelled faintly of my grandmother's lavender perfume, the exact scent they had sprayed on her scarf before the funeral. It would come and go with no reason. Sometimes the mirror reflected my room a shade darker than it really was. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in it even when I was alone. I stopped looking directly into it at night, but every time I covered it, the cloth was on the floor by morning. The worst part happened last Thursday. School let out early because the vice principal came over the intercom and said there had been a disturbing impersonation situation on campus, and they were sending everyone home while the administration investigated. I remember thinking that sounded stupid and vague. One more weird thing in a week full of weird things. I got home around noon, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the kitchen just as my mother screamed and my father dropped a plate on the floor. Standing near the counter was me. Not someone who looked a little like me. Me, my face, my hair, my exact clothes down to the faded cuff on my sleeve. The copy was chewing on the string of my hoodie the same nervous way I always did. For 1 second, my brain simply refused to process it. The other me looked just as shocked as I felt. We stood there staring at each other, both frozen. Then my sister walked into the room wearing my mother's cardigan and carrying a smoothie like she had just returned from the store. She looked from me to the copy and smiled with real pleasure. "Oh, good," she said. "The whole family is here." I pointed at the copy and shouted, "What the hell is that?" My sister frowned at my tone as if I had been rude in front of company. "That's rude," she said. She worked really hard. The copy started crying immediately. Not fake crying exactly. Real tears, shaking breath, red face. "I don't want to go back to school," she said. Her voice sounded like mine too, almost perfect. I looked at my parents, expecting panic, but my mother looked more tired than surprised, and my father cleared his throat the way he always did when he wished he were anywhere else. "There are easier hobbies," he murmured to my sister, as if this were some messy craft project that had gone too far. The copy kept insisting she was the real me. I would have found that easier to laugh at if she had not known things no one should know. My parents, in what they seemed to think was a fair process, began asking us both questions. Favorite movie, middle name, allergies, childhood memories, my first pet, the song I hated when I was 9. The copy answered every question quickly and correctly, not just the obvious facts, the deep, embarrassing, useless details. She knew the name of the boy I had a crush on in 3rd grade. She knew what song had been playing in the car the first night Grandma looked at me and forgot my name. She knew which stuffed animal I pretended to lose because I thought I was too old for it, then cried over in secret. With each answer, my stomach dropped lower. At some point, I stopped feeling angry and started feeling afraid in a new way. Not because someone looked like me, but because she had access to parts of me I thought existed only in memory. It was like hearing my own private history read back to me by a stranger. Then my sister clapped her hands together. "Delighted, okay," she said, like we were in the middle of a game. "Now wear the same outfits." I said no immediately. She pouted and asked, "Please?" That would be hilarious. The copy looked at me, and I looked back at her, and in one horrible second I noticed something I wish I had never seen. She was wearing my favorite sweater better than I did. That sounds stupid, but it is true. She looked cleaner, sharper, the sweater fit her like it belonged there. She held herself the way I imagined I held myself, not the way I actually did. It was like someone had taken all the damage out of me and pressed the wrinkles flat. She looked more like me than I had ever managed to look. Then the copy smiled, her mouth stretched too wide. Not a little, not in a trick of light. It stretched the exact same way my sister's mouth had stretched that night in my room. Impossible and wrong and far beyond what a human face should do. That was when everything inside me went cold and still, because I understood something I had been too scared to understand before. My sister had never really been trying to become me. The clothes, the mirror, the notes, the patterns, the details, the copy in my kitchen, none of it had been about jealousy in the normal sister way. It had been practice. It had been repetition. It had been building and building towards something older and stranger than I wanted to name. And suddenly my grandmother's last words made sense in the worst possible way. You're the only one who looks normal in reflections. She had not been talking nonsense. She had been warning me. She had seen something in the mirror before I did. She had known there was something wearing the shape of my sister long before the rest of us noticed. The copy's smile kept widening, and behind me I heard my sister laugh softly, pleased with herself, like an artist finally happy with the result. That was when I realized the most terrifying part of all. Maybe she had never been trying to become me, because she did not need to. Maybe the reason Grandma said only I looked normal in reflections was because she had already met the original.